Alex, do you believe in heroes?
Yeah, Karan, I believe history's given us plenty of heroes. In this episode, we're looking at the movies that shaped our views of historical figures. So this is Alex from Los Angeles.
And this is Karan from San Francisco. Welcome to Movies That Shaped Us. We are two longtime friends who grew up on opposite ends of the globe with very different backgrounds, but were both shaped and are still being shaped by the movies we see and love. In each episode, we'll cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through three of our favorite movies. All right, so with that, Alex, you already introduced our topic around historical figures, but curious how you thought about this.
Yeah, this is a really fun topic. I'm
Mm-hmm.
someone who loves history, has always loved history, and I also love movies. So when those two things come together in some way, it's extra exciting for me. Movies can bring history to life and bring to life these figures from the past and let the audiences, and definitely like myself in this respect too, see these people in either a new light, or maybe you've never heard of these figures before and you're
Mm-hmm.
can explore new, important figures from history, or maybe you had an impression of a historical figure and then you watch a film and it's like, oh wow, I never thought of him or her like that, or all these things that are new that I'm learning that I thought maybe I knew this person. So I think that is the power of movies. Really, it can illuminate a lot of what has gone by in the past and help us learn from those people and those time periods more.
Movies have the ability to inject humanity into its characters that
Hmm.
are on screen, right? So I think that's the best part when it comes to movies on real people is that these are not documentaries, and
Right.
at the end of the day, they are the interpretation of the screenwriter, the director, the entire cast and crew. But in doing so and in recreating that time period, especially with the period detail and such, no matter when
Hmm.
that might be, you sort of transport it to that time, right? And even though you're living in someone's interpretation of this person and this time, there is humanity that's put on display. And at the end of it, it's on you to decide what do you agree and what do you don't agree with. And if anything, for me, often these movies have become kind of launch pads into learning more about them, right? To kind
Hmm.
of go down the rabbit hole and read all about them and sort of go in the more researchy phase of documentary kind of research, right? If I'm really intrigued by somebody. So but yeah, I love this is why I love period movies. This is why I love movies that are based on real people. And
Hmm.
if done well, they can really do that for you. There are also a lot of bad ways to do this.
Yes.
We are living in a era of every single Oscar winner over the last several years have been makeup transformational real people portrayals, and though I really enjoy the actor kind of ness or actory ness of it all, at the same time it can also, I don't know, kind of cheapen the whole thing as well, if not handled with care. And then last thing I would say is that I like movies that are based on historical people that dive into a moment in time as
Hmm.
opposed to a full sort of cradle to grave kind
Hmm.
of representation, because then already it's an interpretation. It becomes even a thicker layer if you're covering someone's entire life, and at some point it's so hard to then stay with it, and you can't help but not question what's real, what's not real, blah blah blah. Versus if you focus on a event or a moment in time, then it's a very clear slice of what was happening then, and you use that moment to kind of get into the humanity and the psychology and the relationships of this person, as with other people or what have you. And that's sort of my favorite thing.
No, definitely. I think you brought up a lot of good points in that, and why movies are a specific art form that can do specific things, and are fictional movies, I should say, because there's obviously documentaries or nonfiction. Documentaries, if you wanted to cover an entire person's life, a documentary is arguably the better format to do
I
that
think
in.
so.
And you probably want to stick more closely to the facts. Whereas a film, and this is something I wrestled with a lot over the course of my love of historical films and history, I sometimes do get too caught up in that that's not real, this wasn't real, this is inaccurate, which isn't, to your point, the point of
Right.
making a fictionalized version. It's about capturing the feeling or the essence or a theme of what this person was and who he or she did and what they represent, less about the facts. If you want
Hmm.
facts, that's, books are better at that, documentaries are better at that.
Totally.
And I'll talk about that when I get into my movies too, because I think there's a balance you can do there. But it really does
True.
depend on the artist's intent of who the filmmaker is, not necessarily trying to capture reality. They're trying to capture an essence or a feeling that they had this person, which is again something that still to this day sometimes trips me up when I'm watching a movie. I get upset by inaccuracies. So, but that's my own thing. But I think you really summed up really well why I don't want to say that doesn't matter, because you don't want to put like blatant untruths if that's the point of what the movie is. But, you know, you don't have to make everything 100% accurate to get the essence of what the artist is trying to say about this person.
In fact, if it makes you mad, or it's made me mad too, I think that is also part of the joy of it. You know?
Yeah.
Like the artists who've created this thing, they're putting something out there to you know, have a provocation and have this sort of question in you. So in some ways that's intentional.
Yeah, I mean, I think intent is the word there.
Exactly.
If someone's lazy about it, or if their intent is actually to purposefully be untrue because they're trying to make a point by changing what actually happened, that is an issue that I still have with these types of films. But all the films we're talking about today will be interpretations of these people. Just spoiler: no one put a documentary. Neither of us put documentaries on this list. So.
No, that would be a different episode.
Yeah, we're not talking about docs today. So with that, why don't we jump into your number 3 movie that shaped your historical figure, and what is that figure? I'm excited to see.
So my number 3 is Erin Brockovich from 2000, directed by Steven Soderbergh, starring the one and only Julia Roberts, Albert Finney, and a whole bunch of other folks. Quick logline from IMDb: an unemployed single mother becomes a legal assistant and almost single-handedly brings down a California power company accused of polluting a city's water supply. It's actually a pretty well-written description.
That's it. Yeah, that's the movie.
That is the movie. I think a lot of people have probably seen this movie, or I've seen stills of this movie. This is Julia's Oscar win. But as the description says, you know, for me, this movie is on the list because this is obviously somebody that I had no idea who they were. I mean, this is a real life person, but I had no idea who they were when I watched the movie, and hadn't read the book that it was probably. Is it based on a book? It probably is, I think.
I'm actually not sure. Either
it's
a book
actually
or
not. It doesn't
magazine
seem like
article, maybe in a magazine article. I mean, it was. I didn't know of her at the time either. But if you grew up in California, this was in the news a lot around that time.
Yeah. So yeah, that's sort of why this movie is on my list, and I'll go into kind of more detail. But had you watched this movie before?
Yeah, I'd seen this on probably VHS tape rental around the time it came out. I'm not a Julia Roberts fan, so I did not seek it out in theaters. And this was around the time I was actually getting into Steven Soderbergh in a big way. So at this point, I wasn't so obsessed with him where I would have seen this anyway. So I saw it on VHS. It might even actually been after she won her Academy Award. I thought it was fine back then and hadn't seen it in 20 years actually, and thought it was still totally serviceable and fine now. Maybe a lesser Soderbergh. If I had to put in the rank and probably be in the bottom third, but maybe that's just because my bias against, or not bias against, but Julia doesn't really ever do it for me, except surprisingly in Notting Hill. If you folks want to go back and listen to that episode, it was the first time she ever worked in a movie for me. But yeah, I think it's definitely a very serviceable film is probably the best way I can put it.
No, I don't. I guess I can see that, and I'd love to kind of dig into more on why you felt that way. But yeah, when I watched this movie the first time, it definitely resonated a lot with me. And I only knew Julia from a handful of romantic comedies. So to sort of see her in this sort of role, which is kind of powerful and out there and uses her brain, her sexuality, all of it to kind of advance this cause. And also, I this is classic Soderbergh, right? Like, it's great filmmaking. It's intimate, but it's stylized, but it also feels real, and it's very compelling. It pulls you in. There's so many movies, you know, that have been made of this nature, like a whistleblower or a single person's arc who's kind of a reluctant hero at the beginning, but then has this whole hero's journey. And often those movies can be very simple, like, to use your word, serviceable kind of portrayals, versus this one, in addition to its compelling story and performance, it's actually quite moving and quite compelling and kind of has like a thrillery aspect to it. And that is all Soderbergh, I think, which is why, yeah, I wouldn't put this in his top tier, but to me, this is sort of in the second tier, I would say. and there are other tiers beneath it. So yeah,
Okay. I mean,
just to
yeah.
clarify, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
There's a third and a fourth tier. So
Oh, 4 tiers. Wow. I only have 3 tiers. You got to add a fourth tier on there.
I'm just adding one on the
Yeah.
fly.
Okay. That's fine. You can add another tier.
So yeah, this is why I've really always enjoyed this movie. And then the big fun thing, which I don't know how much this is true or just dramatized for the movie, is that
Mhm.
this person is sort of a lost person in the beginning.
Mhm.
And in some ways, they're chasing this cause to actually save themselves or find something to do, but then it ends up taking over their whole life.
Right.
And, and to me, that's the fun part about this. And fun in the sense that it's fun somebody, discovering that for themselves and then also discovering their superpower because
Right.
they weren't a hero before this at all. And,
Mhm.
but what the movie does a good job at is that you see all those ingredients right at the get-go. A movie like this would ring really false to me if suddenly somebody comes into their power and you're wondering how did they get all these ingredients in them.
Right.
But you see those right at the get-go, the way she's handling her kids, the way she's talking to Aaron Eckhart's character. Like she's a hard ass. She
Right.
lost and chaotic, but she also knows what she wants and she's super headstrong. So the movie then builds on that okay, if this person finds their cause and gets the right support, can they take off? And
Mhm.
she does. And it, of
Mhm.
course, comes at a cost and she makes mistakes and what have you. So yeah, this is why you kind of live vicariously through this person. And I don't know, I always had big kind of cheer moments like
Oh yeah.
the one in the office at the very end and when she makes them sip the dirty water.
Oh yeah.
All of those scenes, they never get old for me. And I think she's great. Like this is the last thing I say that Soderbergh is, and we talked about this in the Ocean's 11 episode too, like he's one of the few contemporary directors who really knows how to use his stars,
Definitely. Yeah.
like underline who they are, what their star power, their star narrative is, how people know them, but uses them in a way that feels right to the story
Mhm.
and enlarge that thing that they have already. So this is a very Julia performance. This is not a transformation into somebody
Right.
totally different. You can see Julia, but it's used to bring out Erin, which I think is brilliant. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. It's Julia was the casting in this again, I'm just not a fan of her persona, but her persona is what makes this movie work. And maybe for
Yeah.
me, why it doesn't elevate it enough because I'm not a big fan
Ah,
of her. But I think casting her in this role is really critical because a lot of what Erin, you were just using words to describe Erin, headstrong, pushy, and these things could come across as very negative.
yeah.
And the woman could come across as was very negative too. But because people already love Julia and she's known for these sweeter romantic movies, you can kind of the rougher edges that she brings out in Erin in this role don't make you think less of Erin at all because Julia brings herself into it too. And I think that's what works so well and make you always empathize with the main character, even when sometimes, yeah, she might be a little pushy or off color, but that's actually those are her superpowers in
I
this
think so,
this
yeah.
particular role of trying to beat back a big corporation who's done horrible things to these folks. You want a lawyer who's kind of a shark that won't take no for an answer, that will go out there and do the work, and because they're all doing it on behalf of these innocent victim clients that she has. So it's very, very admirable. And, I'd never heard of Erin Brockovich, the person, until this movie at all. And
Mm-hmm.
she's the great thing about her is she's used her fame not to cash in and just retire on that or get a TV show. It's Erin Brockovich on CNN or whatever, just get a payday. She's still out there fighting
Yeah.
for people around the United States when they are put in these situations. There was a horrible train disaster in East Palestine in the last couple of months, spilled all these toxic chemicals. Very few politicians or ever seemed to care, but she went down there and talked to those people and was trying to get their story out and the government more involved in helping these people. And she's using her fame that she got from this film to still fight the good fight and not just cash in, which I think is super admirable. I'm a big fan of Erin Brockovich, the person. She's super awesome. And it's just great to see her still fighting today on these things.
That's amazing. I did not know that, but that's really cool. But see, that's the thing, right? Like For listeners, like a quick sort of sneak peek, this episode originally was titled Heroes. I really struggle with that because to me, I can't sort of glorify a person, like that at all. Maybe, a few members of my family, but even they are with flaws. I mean, that
Hmm.
that term, I guess to me, and maybe other people don't look at that term in that way, but to me, people who make impact and stand up for something, like all humans, they are going to be complicated characters. They're not
Hmm.
supposed to be likable. They're not supposed to be right all the time.
Hmm.
They need not be put up on the pedestal, even though they're doing good things. And
Right.
I think, like you're saying, like this mashup of Erin and Julia is sort of amazing that even in her unlikability, you root for her.
Right.
And that's okay, because you don't have to like all aspects of somebody. It's more about what path are they chartering? What are they standing
Exactly.
up for?
Right, right. And a lot of times I actually find movies that deal with characters like this, where they do show some of the negative sides, make it more impactful because then it's like, wow, this is just a person like you or me. Like we're
Yeah.
both really flawed. We have good things and bad things about us. And
I
so
mean,
do these
speak for
people.
yourself, but yeah,
Okay.
sure. Yeah.
And so do these other people, but look what they're able to accomplish. And that to me is what's
Exactly.
inspiring about, true heroes like Erin Brockovich, who is not perfect, but she's still, doing things I would call heroic. And I think
I
this
think
movie
so
does a
too.
good job of painting that picture. And in Julia's performance, I think it's more about her casting than her performance per se, that Soderbergh, and they just choosing her as a perfect vehicle for this. I mean, it is a star vehicle, like you said. And I think it all just comes down to the casting for why this movie works as well as it does. The casting of Erin specifically, because it isn't
Yeah.
really an ensemble piece, as great as Albert Finney is.
Right.
But
But you
it's
need those pieces too.
you
But
do.
yeah, this is definitely Aaron. But I think Julia is amazing in this movie. And I'm so happy that if we were going to give an Oscar to, a star who is truly maybe one of the last global mega movie stars,
Hmm.
I'm happy that she has an Oscar for this movie as
Hmm.
opposed to anything else.
Yeah.
Because, it's a transformation, quote unquote. It builds on all of her personas and everything that, people have loved her for, but dials it up.
Hmm. No. Yeah, it's a good performance. Definitely the Academy was right in that Oscar for sure.
All right. What is your number three?
So my number three film that shaped my view of a historical figure is The Elephant Man from 1980. This is a
Hmm.
film directed by David Lynch, starring John Hurt, Anthony Hopkins, and Anne Bancroft. The IMDb plot summary: a Victorian surgeon rescues a heavily disfigured man who is mistreated while scraping a living as a sideshow freak. Behind his monstrous facade, there is revealed a person of kindness, intelligence, and sophistication. So this film is about the Elephant Man, which was he was, like the description said, this is Victorian times. It's heavily disfigured guy. It was a real life character from that time who was found by this doctor, studied him, actually wrote a book about him, and then he unfortunately died rather young, the Elephant Man himself. And this film was sort of not a full life, cradle to grave story, but really capturing more of the doctor's time with the Elephant Man, because it is based on that book. And for me, this film always left an impression because I did read the book in high school. Part of my high school program, I had to read books over the summer. There's like a list that to choose from. I just picked this at random and read the book that the Victorian doctor had written, and just like mesmerized by how cool this, or not cool, but interesting this story was. There were
Hmm.
photos in it where you could see,
Oh,
the
wow.
Elephant Man, what he looked like, these black and white photos. But really, what this movie did is bring John Merrick, who's the name of the Elephant Man, to life in a way that the book even really couldn't. You empathize with him so much more in this film because you see people's reactions to him, calling him a monster, pulling away from him, laughing at him, mistreating him. These are all things that are talked about in the book, but there's just such a difference in terms of seeing it, which is why for me, movies are so powerful. So I'll stop there and just ask if you'd heard of the Elephant Man, seen this film before. What's your history with John Merrick?
Yeah. Heard of him for sure. Had not watched the movie. I did go to New York many years ago to see Bradley Cooper play this role on Broadway in a
Oh, cool.
play,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
was
yeah.
amazing. But we've talked about this before. Like I just always imagine that all of David Lynch's movies are going to be a certain kinds for,
Hmm.
kind of stir things and generate shock value. And I don't know why I had that impression. And I'm so glad that you put this on the list because this is my favorite thing about watching movies, or I guess in life too, which is you make up your mind about something and then my favorite thing is that you're proven wrong. That
Mm.
you watch something and you see that, oh, this movie, there's nothing more real and moving and humanity grounded that I've seen in a while. This It was absolutely amazing to watch this movie and these performances and all of it. So I'm very excited to dive into it with you.
No, I'm glad you liked it. And I think a lot of the things you're talking about too is what, again, the book was great, but
Mm,
you can't really empathize with him. You empathize him by looking, it's like sympathy you have for him by seeing the photos of what he looked like and hearing the doctor describing all the things that he did and what his childhood was like, etc. But seeing how these other Victorian folks were reacting to him really does make you feel for him. And I think what Lynch does too, the movie's in black and white, and the tone of it almost feels like a 1930s monster film, like a James Whale film where you
yeah.
do have a lot of sympathy for the Frankenstein monster, even though, the people of the village want to burn it, burn his house down and kill the monster. And I think that is what works so well in this movie and makes it actually, to me, feel more, not only give the empathy like you do in those James Whale monster films, but it makes it more realistic because it's in black and white for some reason, because all the photos back then were in black and white of Merrick and the doctor and everything. And it for some reason adds a level of truth when these movies are in black and white. I don't know, maybe that's just me of like, oh, this feels more truthful. Like I'm actually transported back there because the only thing I have to visualize the Victorian London are through black and white photos and really early, black and white movies. So I kind of picture that world being in black and white sometimes. So I just think that for me works really well in terms of adding that layer of truth
Yeah.
to this.
There's something to that, but I think to me more so his makeup and all of it is just, first of all, so incredible. And I was reading that this is the movie that sort of started the makeup and hair Oscar. There
Yeah, that's
wasn't
true.
one before,
Mm-hmm.
which is amazing. I
Yeah.
didn't know that. But I think the black and white is good for that too, because if this were in color, I think you'll be too distracted
Mm.
to see the kind of detail in the makeup versus with black and white and this amazing use of lighting and cinematography and such. I don't know, it feels more believable and real in a way that this
Mm-hmm.
person could be walking around you, and I don't know, in color it would probably sensationalize
Mm.
the makeup and the transformation, and it would probably feel like a transformation as opposed to this person just being amongst us.
Right, right, right. Yeah. That's a really good point. And what I love too, I mean, the makeup is incredible and John Hurt is incredible. And
Oh,
I love what Lynch does in the beginning of the film. You don't see him.
right.
And it's
The
you
reveal.
you see him under a hood or you see his back, and all you're seeing is people reacting to him in
Yeah.
horror. And that really, I think, puts you in his shoes in a way. He's not
Hmm.
seeing himself all the time like everyone else is. So in the beginning of this film, when Lynch is not allowing you to see him and all you're seeing is reactions, that's a much like he lived through his entire life of just seeing people reacting to him in mainly horror and shock, and then there's some curiosity, but it's that to me felt really moving, and again something in the book which I really liked, and I was fascinated with John Merrick after reading the book, but it felt more like a something I was interested in learning about versus in the film it's like you feel for him and it's like you understand him as a human being, which he does have that great line about, basically like, am I not human? That he delivers in
Yeah.
this is just so great. I mean, John Hurt, his performance in this is just incredible, especially through all that
Unbelievable.
makeup.
Unbelievable. Yeah, the point that you're making just now about the slow reveal and looking at other people's reactions to him and not seeing him, in a way, David Lynch ends up doing a number on the audience as well, because you are also behaving like other people. At least I was
Mm,
early on, because his reveal is sensationalized and
right.
you are sort of curious but also scared, and all the feelings and reactions that are shown on other people. But then because of that slow reveal and build up over time, you start to then build that empathy for this person, to the point that when he's all dressed up and excited to go for the
To the
theater
theater, yeah.
performance, he's so cute actually,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
and because so the movie does a number on you, because this is how it is, that something that you don't know or you don't fully understand or something that feels new, you are scared of it, and you react to it negatively. But then when you start to really understand them and build empathy for them, how they look and all the external stuff starts to fade away.
Right. He just becomes human. He's just another human
Exactly.
who loves the theater. He loves sculpture, likes
Yeah.
painting. All of his passions come through.
Yeah.
And you just, hey, he's just another guy that
Yeah. And
seems
just so
really cool.
sweet and so
Yeah.
kind. And oh my gosh, that scene of him visiting the doctor's home and meeting his wife and
Oh,
responding the way he does, sobbing mess I
yeah.
was. And I've thought about that scene since I watched this movie. It's just so incredible.
Yeah. It's, again, John Hurt just through that makeup and just incredible. So touching. And it really does humanize Merrick in a way that, again, a book is more academic.
Yeah.
Just a great film. So I think that's a good point too to listeners as well that might not like David Lynch. Maybe you've seen several of his films. I think this is maybe one or two of his most mainstream, I'll say, or approachable or accessible movies. Not that that's a knock on this film or saying his other movies aren't good, because he's one of my favorite directors. And you can definitely tell this is him. Like, he has his touches in here for sure, but it's not some overly sensationalized or some crazy fever dream like a lot of his other films are.
Right.
There are some of that, the beginning and the ending with the elephant and his mom, but it's really just a very straightforward story that's told us incredibly well. So I'm not surprised to hear that you, as someone who's not a big fan of Lynch, still liked this film, because it's got the DNA of Lynch in here and his themes are there, but the aesthetics are a little more toned down, which I think is, again, to his credit, is a decision that he made to do that, to not distract from that performance and the story
the
of John Merrick.
emotionality of it. Yeah,
Exactly.
I mean, I will say I'm not a fan of him. I'm just not. In some ways, this movie has probably helped me move past my mental block.
Okay.
And to the point that now I'm going to watch more of his stuff. So I'm actually excited about that.
Maybe there might be another one on the podcast coming up soon, so we can talk about Lynch then more at that point. But yeah, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
No, and I also have to say Anthony Hopkins is always amazing. And I think that's the other thing, like I was saying up top, like this could have been just a story based on John Merrick, but pairing him with the doctor and watching the doctor kind of question his own motives and his own identity in relationship with John Merrick is actually really smart, because otherwise it would not be a fully realized world if it were just John Merrick. Like all these people, his Carney guy, the guy at the hospital, the nurses, and Bancroft's character, like it's a true ensemble piece in that sense. Like you get like a full rounded view of all kinds of humanity, and they're all fully three-dimensional people, the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Right.
Even the good have shades of gray. Like even Anne Bancroft, she seems very nice, but you're sort of, the way she enters, the way she looks at him, I'm like, wait, you don't even have a single reaction to see this person? Like, what are you hiding? What are you masking? Like it does such a number on the audience, I think, which is why I kudos to David Lynch for doing that, because this could have been like a very stripped down, sensationalized, heightened, straightforward story just based on John Merrick, but it's not. It's very layered.
That's true. And the film brings up a little bit. And so you question like Hopkins's motivations a little bit too, because he could be using Merrick too, just for his own fame versus actually caring about him.
Yeah.
That's you're totally right. They expanded the scope of the story. Okay, Karan, let's move on to your number 2. What do you got for us?
So my number 2 is Amadeus from 1984, directed by Milos Forman, starring F. Murray Abraham, Tom Hulce, Elizabeth Berridge. Quick logline: the life, success, and troubles of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, as told by Antonio Salieri, the contemporaneous composer who was deeply jealous of Mozart's talent and claimed to have murdered him. Yeah, I don't know. For those who haven't watched this movie, it is set in the time period of Mozart's sort of height to power, but the movie does a very interesting thing of obviously showing Mozart's genius, who is, I would say, the protagonist, or at least the catalyst of the movie, but it's done more from the point of view of Salieri, which, as the IMDb description said, is this other composer who is older, senior, much higher in rank, is at the palace and such already, but is totally terrified and jealous of the amazing talent of Mozart, and everything that sort of inspires and transpires thereafter. Had you watched this movie before, Alex?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite movies of all time. I put it in my top 10. I'm
Yeah,
so glad you put this on. I love watching this movie. It's just a incredible film. Huge fan.
it really is. I think I'd watched it maybe once, but 8, 10 years ago, and ever since it's sort of made that mark on my mind.
Yeah.
And the reason it's on the list is, other than just being an amazing movie, is that, Mozart obviously is Mozart. Everybody knows Mozart.
Hmm.
But to then discover, at least on my first viewing, what a little shit Mozart was, pardon my French. Uh, but then also seeing him from the lens of this other person. And I don't know how much of this is true versus not. I don't think it's a totally accurate account, I think,
No.
right?
Yeah,
No.
there's a
Yeah,
lot of inaccuracies in this. Yeah.
exactly. But again, like we said, not the point.
Hmm.
And you really get a point of, I think this movie really talks about genius, and the cost of that. Like, Mozart is a genius, but is a handful, and it doesn't treat people very well, abuses them, uses them, but at the same time is a genius.
Hmm.
But then on the other hand, you see this other person who is maybe not very good at what they do, but are further kind of, dug in their own hole because of their jealousy towards this person. So you see a lot of role reversal. So I don't know, when I think about historical figures and heroes, it's
Hmm.
it's it's almost fun to engage with somebody who is so prominent in our culture even today. Like, people know who Mozart is,
Oh yeah.
and to view their complicatedness in this kind of a way that's done in such a delicious, heightened way. That's why this movie is on the list.
Were you a fan of Mozart? Like, how were you? What was your POV on him before coming into this film?
I had no idea about who he was other than his music.
Hmm.
And in fact, that's the thing, even in the movie, right? Like, when he's in the jail, Salieri, the priest and other people, the moment he talks about classical music or plays a tune, they know Mozart's tune, but they don't
Right.
know anybody else's tune, which
Yep.
is sort of true even
Yeah.
till this date. Like, I knew his work, but I didn't know much about him. And to discover all of this messiness, even if it's not all true, was really fun.
Yeah, I did similar. I grew up with classical music,
Yeah.
loved classical music, and Mozart was one of my favorite composers. And seeing this film then as a kid, I love the music, but then it starts you to see, oh wow, he's just like a guy
Yeah.
who's kind of nuts and very, there's even a line in the movie he says, I'm a vulgar man, but my music is not. Like, he's a vulgar little guy.
Yeah.
And it sort
Farting
of
all
makes
over the
him
place.
exactly,
And
yeah.
oh,
And that piece was actually all true. That part, there's a lot of letters that he was sending to his cousins and things where they're super vulgar and like a lot of dirty jokes and stuff in there. So he was like a vulgar man, like he admits to in the film. But it does bring him to life. And I've only had an association with him with his music. I didn't really know or maybe even really care who the guy was. I just loved
right.
what he did. But then seeing this movie, you're like, oh, he's such an interesting guy. And his life story is so interesting and how it even informed his music and what his music was doing, which I think this movie does a great job of too, showing how bold and different and radical his music even was. He was using stories that were sort of seen as tawdry. He was going against the king's wishes and putting ballet
Right.
in his theater or his opera. So all these things that like now you have these things are just, hey, it's Mozart's opera. Like, you're not thinking about this stuff. So by putting in that contemporary setting, it sort of makes him more cool in a way because he was so ahead of his time with everything that he
Totally.
was doing, even though he was only in his 20s.
Kind of amazing. And that's the other thing. I think the movie does a great job of showing what it is to be an artist. Like, it would be so
Right.
difficult and drab to show on screen what does it take to create music. And I think this
Hmm.
movie is like probably one of the best movies I've seen that shows the process
Hmm.
of creation of art and the trials and tribulation. And to our earlier conversations of empathy, like, you start the movie by judging Mozart and, what a little shit he is and what have you,
Hmm.
but then you start to develop a lot of empathy for him because he's truly, even though he's a vulgar man, he truly is a student of art.
Right.
And he wants to do well. Like, this is all he does. And you sort of build empathy versus Salieri, who's probably fine at what he does, but he's spending all of his energy and time in just, putting the other guy down as opposed to focusing on his music. Versus Amadeus, he loses everything, his
Right.
wife, his kid, his fame and fortune, but the music is what drives him and keeps him alive. So it's, yeah, you build a lot of empathy in that process, I think.
No,
Yeah.
definitely. And I love again the dichotomy between the
Yeah.
two characters, in that the scenes where you're talking about making music, you see Salieri just piano, he's like composing, he's, typing in some notes and he's writing a little thing down and he's thinking about it. And then you see Mozart and it's just all coming out of his head and he's
Yeah.
writing it all down. And, which this is a true fact that he didn't have drafts of his music. It just sort of came out and went on the page and it's perfect. And so it's like a genius next to
Totally.
just a normal guy. I mean, that's the whole theme of this movie too, right? Mediocrity. It's like I'm the patron saint of all the folks who are just the mediocre around the world, which is most people are mediocre at all their job. There are very few people that are really, to use what this film says, touched by God and given this gift. There's few geniuses that have ever existed that at least we have record of, Mozart being one of them. And it just showing that dichotomy between the two, one person who wishes he had that, is in a way loves being in the presence of Mozart because he can see the genius and the music really touches him. But there is that envy and that jealousy there that drives him mad. Like he would have been totally fine just being like, oh, wow, this kid's really cool. I'm going to help him. Just enjoy the music. I
In
still have
fact,
my cushy
Mozart
job.
takes him as a teacher
He
and wants
does.
to actually, and
Right.
he abuses that so
Yep.
badly.
Because of this innate desire that then there's a whole religious theme in this movie too, where he's basically attacking God for that because he promised himself to God and God didn't give him the talent, but gave this vulgar little kid this talent, even though that's all that he ever wanted as Salieri. So there's so much going on in this movie too between those two characters, and the performances are some of the best I've ever seen in a movie too. Like F. Murray Abraham and Salieri, I've grown appreciation more for that performance over the years because I've seen this movie like at least a dozen times over the last like 20, 25 years of my life. And at first I was like, oh, Mozart's so cool. That actor's so great. And I kind of get caught up on the more showy performance. But what F. Murray Abraham is able to capture in this movie, especially in these scenes when he's showing how much he appreciates of Mozart's music and he's listening, like reading the sheet music, and you can feel just the power of Mozart in his performance is just unbelievable.
Yeah, it's so, I mean, it's probably relatively easy to portray jealousy, but I think it's much harder to portray jealousy and admiration and also heartbreak that I would never be this way. And you see all of that in the F. Murray Abraham performance. I will say though, over time though, to me it was the opposite. Like I was all about F. Murray Abraham's performance, and Tom Halsey was like a fine. But as I watched the movie more and more, I've come to appreciate Tom Halsey's performance a lot more, to the point that maybe it's the makeup on old F. Murray Abraham, like that doesn't really hold up anymore. So that in this last viewing, I found that to be a little bit distracting versus Tom Halsey was just, I was like, oh, he's like an equal to the other performance. So
yeah,
either way, they're both amazing. The whole ensemble is great. Production design, period setting, all of it is amazing. Yeah.
For sure. And just the movie's so funny too. Like Jeffrey Jones, another call out as the emperor, his too many notes, and there it is. Like that, some of the funniest stuff you'll see in a movie. The movie sort of has a little bit of everything, and it's 3 hours, but it just, I think for me at least, kind of you blow right through it because it's just so entertaining. I can't speak more highly of this film. And again, just in this context of a historical figure where a listener might just hear Mozart and assume what he would have been like. And then seeing this and just like, oh wow, like he was just a guy, like some normal pop star today who was on the top, really talented, but also kind of a little bit of a train wreck. I mean, Mozart was kind of a train wreck. He always spent too much money, partied too hard. He lived life to its fullest, and I think maybe that's why he gave us such great music. Sometimes that's the price you pay for being in touch with musical talent, is hedonistic lifestyle. Maybe those two things are tied together somehow.
Probably. In that, like what you said, the movie is very contemporary and will be contemporary. The other thing we didn't touch on is that what we do to our heroes. There's a little bit of Salieri in all of us, in a way, where we look at people who are very talented or more talented than we are, and we're like, oh, he's just a little shit. Like, you find the faults and you focus on them and you kind of bring them down, as what society does too. So that's the other theme that's at play, that even though everybody recognizes that this person is a genius, they can't wait to bring him down.
Right. The people in the court are conspiring against him. Obviously, Salieri's doing horrible things behind the scenes just to tear the guy down. But at the end of the day, even though unfortunately I mean, he doesn't actually kill Mozart in real life, but Mozart did die really young.
Yeah.
But the joke's on them because Salieri never would be remembered today if it wasn't for this movie.
Right.
And the movie's called Amadeus anyway, which is sort of like a dig at him. Like
Yeah.
he's still riding Mozart's coattails. Even the reason why we're mentioning him in this podcast, or else he'd be forgotten.
Because
like,
of Mozart.
because of Mozart. So ha ha ha, Salieri. Which I mean, the real guy I'm sure wasn't this like this, so I don't want to knock the real guy, but the fictional Salieri in this movie. Which just one more point on the truth thing that we were discussing about too. What this movie does so brilliantly is it's told through Salieri. So he's an unreliable narrator. So really, you can't kind of attack this movie for historical inaccuracies. Can you say, hey, look, it's Salieri. He's an old senile man telling a story. He can't expect them to be 100% true. So it's not meant to be true from the outset, which I think is 100% true, which I think is just brilliant about the framing of this, which is based on a play. So I don't want to give the movie too much credit, but it's just absolute genius. I can't speak more highly of this film.
Yeah. All right. What is your next?
Well, to stick on the music theme, actually, I'll go to another musician who also died tragically young. The movie's The Doors from 1991, directed by Oliver Stone, starring Val Kilmer, Meg Ryan, Kyle MacLachlan, and Kevin Dillon. The IMDb plot summary: the story of the famous and influential 1960s rock band The Doors and its lead singer and composer Jim Morrison, from his days as a UCLA film student in LA to his untimely death in Paris, France, at the age of 27 in 1971. So, like the name of the movie and the plot summary says, The Doors is a band in the 60s, in just in case folks haven't heard of them before. Jim Morrison was their lead singer and did die young. I had been someone who grew up with The Doors. I feel maybe this is just an American thing or maybe just a generational thing. Like, at least people that I knew, men and women, sort of seemed to go through a phase of like 2 or 3 years where all they were was obsessed with The Doors and Jim Morrison, and then you kind of grow out of it. But it's an important period in adolescence, I feel like, the Doors phase. So I definitely had that extended even into college for me. And this was before the age of Wikipedia and, easy access to knowledge of what the true story was. So I only knew kind of about legends about what, his life and kind of who he was. And what this movie did, I think, is kind of double down on that, the mythos. The movie definitely tries to elevate Jim Morrison and The Doors to this mythic status, which I think also matches a lot what Jim Morrison was even doing in his own life at the time, with lying about his parents being killed early and telling these tales of Indian spirits entering him when he saw an auto accident as a kid. So it's kind of fits into the ethos, even though, again, it's not true. And I'm just curious if you went through a Doors phase over in India at any point, or maybe you will after seeing this film. Yeah, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I didn't go through that phase, but obviously, familiar with their music. Maybe came to their music a little bit later in life, I would say.
In high school.
Yeah, but had a very similar sort of thing that for a moment it felt like, oh, this is like so cool, and then you sort of just,
Grew out of it.
Yeah, exactly. But I never watched the movie. Always wanted to watch it, so it was fun to get into it. Yeah, it's a trippy movie, to say the least.
Yeah.
But I guess before I share my own opinions, what did you think of the movie?
Yeah, so when I saw it as a high schooler, like when I was into the band, again, it added to the mythos that I had. Like, oh wow, it's making them seem even kind of cooler. And then I went through a period when the internet was around, and I kind of bought a bunch of books on the Doors, and the Doors themselves, even actually the surviving 3 members when the movie came out, attacked it for being very untrue. That wasn't the Jim Morrison that they knew. He was not this crazy guy, and he was very funny and all these sort of things. So then my opinion on the movie kind of then soured a little bit. And then now I've kind of come back around to realizing that's not really what Oliver Stone was trying to do. He was trying to capture a feeling of what the music meant to him and all the Doors fans. And that, I think, what this movie is a trip. Like, the whole movie has a vibe to it, and the cinematography's got these crazy, like, floaty cameras that are moving all around. There's a lot of really sharp use of color in this film. There's a lot of reds. They like the scenes very red. And it does feel like when you're watching the movie, at least to me, as someone who is still a fan of the Doors, it feels like you're listening to a Doors song as you're watching the movie, which I think is why the power of this film. And that's kind of really what it was more trying to capture than it is, oh, this is exactly what Jim Morrison's life was actually like. Maybe the issues with this are more around the things they show in the movie that he actually didn't do. Like, he didn't try to burn his girlfriend in her closet or attack her at Thanksgiving. Like, it does sort of show him a little more chaotic in a negative way, or try to commit suicide at one point. Like, those things did not happen, and maybe that's why the band got so upset. But I kind of get the artist's intention a little bit more now, and I've come back around to appreciate what the state this movie puts you in. And one thing I'll say too before that, I'm curious to hear what you thought as well. The movie came out in 91, and I think this set a template for the cookie cutter like movie biopic era that we're living in now. And
especially
I think,
musicians.
yes, the music biopic movie has been done to death over the last 20 years, and I think is always going to be with us. Not that this was the first one of those, but I think that this movie set the template moving forward, and the newer movies are less good. Did you kind of get that feeling too when you were watching it?
And that was sort of part of it. Like, I totally agree that the movie is a vibe. It's a fever dream and trippy and gets the essence of the music and this person really well. But because this template of the tortured musician, fame gets him, and then he ruins everything, and the people around him, is just so been there, done that. And to me, it was sort of, that was the feeling, like going back and watching sort of original quote unquote text and feeling like, oh, I've already seen this like a million times.
Right.
So that was not fun. Like, if anything, I guess what we were saying earlier, if the intention was kind of a fever dream vibe kind of thing, I would have appreciated perhaps just to take a slice of his life. And I think this movie suffers because it is painting a broader narrative, right? From, childhood to his death, literally. You then can't help but not question that, oh, did this really happen? And all the narrative beats, they start to take, greater space in your head than they're meant to. So I wish this was a much shorter movie. It's too long, to the point that I had to fast forward like so many of the performances. I was like, okay, I can't watch another more thing of this. Although the last performance with all the extras and in the big, that was amazing. Like, I mean, kudos to that time to do this for real. I mean, but I don't even know how many extras they have. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I gotta say, actually, those scenes to me are the strength of the movie. The performance scenes, not only because Val Kilmer's actually singing, that's his actual singing. He's not dubbing or anything. But you really, and I bet it was not. And actually, the Doors concerts were not like how they were depicted in this movie. They were not as crazy and as much kind of wild stuff going on. But in my mind, that's always when I was listening to the music, oh, I wish I could go back into a Doors show. I bet it would be like this. And then you see that and you're like, oh my God, that's sort of what I would want. So I love that they can capture that of, like, in my mind, what a Doors show would have been like in like 1968, even though, again, like the band is like, this is not how these shows were. Like, actually, Jim never performed topless. And there's multiple scenes in this movie where he's performing without his shirt on. It's funny, too. I even had an action figure of Jim Morrison. Again, I was obsessed with the Doors for a while. And it was him with his shirt off singing in a microphone, which he never did. He never had his shirt off on any performance. He always had his shirt on. So it's this sort of like legend versus reality. And I prefer the legend sometimes. But
no, it's cool. Exactly. Because again, if you want to know who they were, go watch a documentary or read a book on them. So,
which there is a great actual Doors documentary that Johnny Depp narrates from the last 10 years. I think it was like 2010, 2011. That is very good, just as a straightforward examination of who the Doors were. But to me, this movie is about like what they represented and how they felt. Quick anecdote too. I went to his grave in Paris when I was in college for the very first and only time in my life so far, like a spiritual experience where I felt I could feel him below me. It was crazy, but it was like an out of body weird sort of thing that I felt just being there when I know he's under there, and it's weird. But I think this movie feels like that to me too. When I watch this, it's like I feel a spirit sort of entering me from watching the film, like I did when I visited his grave in Paris.
Groovy, dude. Groovy.
There you go.
Yeah, if only this movie was shorter.
Sure. I think. No, that's fair. I'm not.
This would be an amazing masterpiece for what it's trying to do and what its intent is. The other thing I would say is, I mean, you already mentioned it, Val Kilmer is amazing.
Oh, yes. Like, so good.
Probably in the top tier kind of real life person biopic performances, I think. Because it's not even it's not an impersonation. It's not even a transformation. It's sort of just being this person totally. I mean, not that I know how the real guy was, but I can't imagine anybody else. He's great. On the polar opposite side, Meg Ryan, very bad casting. Like, from the first scene, I was like, wait, you're in this movie?
Yeah.
And you're in a different movie. You're in Sleepless in Seattle in this movie. You're walking around with your hair and that was not great.
I know that her estate
I
was
know. I read
working
about
with
that
them.
too.
Yeah. And
They
they
wanted her
wanted,
to be put as an angel or
right.
something, which
Exactly.
they got the right person for
I was
that.
just gonna say that's why they cast Meg Ryan, who
Yeah.
was, the angel of the moment at the time.
Yeah.
But I agree, the performance is actually outside of Val Kilmer in this movie all up, even like Kyle MacLachlan and
Doesn't have much to do.
they,
He's
and they
yeah.
seem like parodies of it's
Yeah.
like you're watching a TV movie in
Yeah.
terms of the level of parody that they're doing, except
Yeah.
for Val, who is, like you said, just not even it's
It's an out of body
transformative. It
experience.
really is.
Yeah.
So he sort of wipes the rest of the acting for this movie that is very cookie cutter and not that. Yeah, I mean the movie's not great or one of Oliver Stone's best, but I do think it just, for me, just with the association with the Doors, I think it just cements their legacy in my mind.
Yeah. And the smacking tongue Andy Warhol. I'm like, what are you doing? What is
Crispin
happening?
Crispin
Crispin,
Glover's Andy Warhol is inspired Cassett. I will say that though.
hilarious. I had to rewind that scene. I was like, what? What is happening? Why are you doing? What are you doing with your tongue? Is
Yeah.
this normal? It's clear.
That is one of the true actual things that did happen in real life. Like, he did give Jim Morrison this gold telephone for some reason that no one really even understood. So there are some, true things in this movie. It's only like the weirdest things that usually end up being true. I think this movie's one of those. Okay, I think we might be done with music. Who are we moving on to now, Kron? What's your number one?
Well, from music royalty, we're moving to a different kind of royalty, real royalty. So my number one is the movie The Queen from 2006, directed by Stephen Frears, starring Helen Mirren, Michael Sheen, and a whole bunch of other great British actors. Quick logline: after the death of Princess Diana, Queen Elizabeth II struggles with a reaction to a sequence of events nobody could have predicted. Yeah, so like the logline says, this movie is based on this very specific moment in time when Tony Blair has become prime minister, Diana just dies, and the Queen is kind of wrestling with how to react with to Diana's death, but also it captures this kind of change in time of what Britain goes through, and through that even the world goes through in terms of how we internally deal with our emotions, but also this everlasting question between monarchy and government. What is the place of the monarchy? It has a lot of different themes on his mind. But yeah, curious if you'd watched this movie before.
Yeah, I saw this when it came out and loved it, and hadn't seen it, I think, since then. And it was interesting because when I saw it, my opinion of all the people in the movie was very high in terms of the real people. And now I think I despise every single person that's depicted in this movie, but the movie's still great. And I was like, this movie is so good. It's just so well done. I love the acting's great. Like, everything is great. So my personal opinion having changed did not affect my enjoyment of the film. It was really great to watch this again, especially now the timeliness of the fact that she had passed away recently and there's a new leader in Britain. I'm sure the British people are going through a lot of these same questions that were being asked in this film with what's the point of these people? Why do we need them? Are they good? Are they bad? Are they human? Are they lizard people? Like, whatever, they talk about over there. So it's kind of timely to go back to the question this movie is raising.
Yeah, totally agree. Yeah, I'd watched this movie not when it came out, but a little bit after. But I still remember I was in India at that time when Princess Diana died, and it was
oh my God, yeah,
it was a crazy time even there. Like I still remember there were these two girls who lived right above us, and they basically didn't leave their apartment and for like a week, and their mother we would run into her, and we were like, how are the girls doing? And I was like, oh, really? What's happening? And I was still young, and of course, anybody passing, especially anybody of this kind of notoriety passing, is sort of a sad
suddenly in a horrific accident,
suddenly in a horrific way. But I didn't, I was, even though growing up in India, obviously the whole thing with British and colonialism and all of that is very much part and parcel of how you reckon with history and such. But I wasn't sort of an Anglophile or a monarchy obsessed person either way, for or against, neither. I was sort of neutral. And I think watching this movie, what I said up front, I think this movie is the best example of sort of humanizing
definitely
people who are so far away from you. You may agree or you may disagree with what they stand for, what their beliefs might be, but you absolutely connect with them on their humanity.
Right.
And that's what this movie does. And and you just need a week really of
Right.
insight to
Mm-hmm.
get that flavor.
Mm-hmm.
So like you said, the performances are great. um I watched this movie several times since then because it's such a great acting showcase, which is the kind of
Mm-hmm.
movies that I like, but it's also a big scope movie, which is
Yeah.
probably my favorite kind of movie, which has all the elements at play, but it's also a great acting showcase. So yeah, I watched it many times since, and yeah, I still kind of fall on the same side, which is of that these people are also humans. You know, they're
Mm-hmm.
put in circumstances. Yeah, they could probably end the whole thing and walk out the door, but that would also not be a human thing to do because humans don't do that.
Right.
They're given
Right.
power, they don't leave it
Right.
actually.
Right. Right.
So it's all very human, and it's sort of fun to see the two, Tony Blair and the Queen, wrestle through that. And then I think the movie is also very funny. Like Prince Philip is like hilarious to me. All of his quips and jabs. I mean, they're all super inappropriate, but quite funny. All the ceremonies, the fleet of corgis running up
Mm-hmm.
and down. Like it's for a topic that's quite serious. The movie is actually very light on its feet. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
take itself too seriously. And I also love how the movie intercuts like real life footage of how people are reacting to Diana's death.
Mm-hmm.
There's no actress playing Diana. Like those are
Right.
such brilliant choices to kind of really create what it was like to live in that time, because
Right.
you might be indifferent all the way to somebody who absolutely obsessed and loved Diana, to maybe somewhere in the middle, or somebody who thought she was okay, and
Or hated her,
or hated
like
her
the
even.
family, the royal family did. Yeah.
Right. So you get to see all of that, and
Mm-hmm.
and I think the movie poses some really smart questions. And as always, everybody's in the gray.
No, I thought that was a brilliant choice of the press too, because the
Yeah.
press is so much of a character in this movie,
Yeah.
with a lot of where, what the queen was kind of complaining about, and the family was too, of it's the press and how they were portraying Diana and how she was using the press, and she knew how to use the press a lot better than they did. And I think they were kind of jealous of her for that. But so by not directly having like a news reporter part of this thing, and it was just, no, like she's off in her castle somewhere watching everything on TV. I mean, that's how she even dealt with this whole story, which is the same. For me, I was at remember, like, it was one of the, I think, the only time I ever babysat at all growing up. I was at someone's house babysitting their kid, and like I just put them to bed, and I was downstairs watching TV, and I saw the thing like, breaking news, blah blah blah. And I was like, the rest of the night I was just like glued to my TV, much like they were too.
Yeah.
The royal family, like, they didn't have any kind of benefit of access to anything, because they also were viewing everything through the TV, at least in this movie. And that helps you put yourself a little bit in her shoes, like, oh, we were both watching what was going on the TV. Like, she was sitting there with Philip watching it, and so was I. So it does make her very human in this film, and I think a lot of it is to the acting's credit.
Amazing.
And it very easily, because all these people, from Tony Blair to Philip to the Queen, they're all famous, and they could have fallen into the trap, like the movie we just talked about, The Doors, where the actors are sort of playing caricatures of these real life people. These to me feel almost more human than the actual real people, because I didn't hang out with a queen for a week and really kind of get inside her head. I see her as a caricature in real life, and Tony Blair and all these folks. And this movie does humanize them in a way that I think is the triumph of the screenplay, really.
Oh yeah. I mean,
so
Peter Morgan has made a career on this, and he's
that's
brilliant at it.
that's right. He has that Crown show now.
Yeah.
It all started with the Queen. Yeah, this is one of the first one. Or actually, he might have done some TV movies with Blair. He had a bunch of Blair movies that I watched.
I see.
He has a whole cinematic universe around the Windsors that he's sort of the Kevin Feige of. But I think that's the brilliant thing in this film. And I love too the opening shot of the movie where she's getting a portrait painted.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's like an artist interpreting her in real life, which is again what the movie's doing. So I think that's a way to kind of say, look, we don't actually know what happened. This is just Stephen Frears and the screenwriter's interpretation of what actually existed and who these people are, because we can't know who anyone is, like, unless you get a brain transplant or something like that,
Right, exactly.
So I think that's such a brilliant way to open it too, because then it's sort of like, look, we know this isn't maybe real, but it's a slice of how we're trying to bring empathy for the audience to these people in a situation that is relatable. Like, people know people that die. Yeah, it's not always Princess Diana, but it's like the problems they're trying to solve are very human problems that everyone has. And they responded in human ways,
Totally. I mean, it's a daughter-in-law who you love, but then things didn't go right, and you have you love their son, but they've turned out to be disappointing in different ways. You thought they would do things differently or make different choices, but yet the strategies happen. You care for your son and your grandchildren, but you also have these complicated feelings about the relationship that existed.
Right.
This is all could be happening in, your neighbor's home, in your own home. So
exactly.
And I think the other thing the movie does such a great job at, which is a central question of, monarchy, should they be around or no? And the movie plants enough characters across the board that are, revering them, but also throwing jabs at them in a very smart, sort of clever way, which is never, cheap in any way, but it's all thought provoking, right?
Right.
And you're sort of shifting your allegiances all the time, which is such a clever thing to do in a movie. Like right from the first scene when Tony Blair and his wife, they show up, at first you're like, oh my gosh, all this pageantry, and you can't do this, you can't do that. But then as time goes on, you sort of start to get pulled in the tradition and the ceremony and all of it as well. And then you're immediately like, oh no, this is all silly. So it's such a clever movie in that sense, which is also probably what's happening in real life. Like this thing exists because it provides this sort of pageantry and something for people to root for, as much as reality TV stars or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you see those hordes and hordes of bouquets and what have you outside the palace where people have just been camping out,
right,
and are so touched by this and have lost their meaning in life. I mean, it's amazing, and it's all happened.
Oh, definitely. And I think how I interpret at least the Queen's journey in this movie is a lot of kind of what you were saying. I don't think she realized, and I'm not saying this to belittle the monarchy either, that they're essentially just reality TV show stars. Yeah. And that's how people see them. And they love, and they get a lot of things out of that. And Diana was that. And the Queen sort of, I think, was feeling like she was something different. And she's not really. And that is her revelation, I feel like, by the end of the movie. Like, Blair's really in charge of the government. She's not. She serves a purpose, and when she doesn't provide that to the people of mourning with them because of a death of another one of the stars of the show that just passed away, and she's trying to act like, no, I'm the Queen, I can't be doing these sowing emotions. Like, well, hold on a second. The Queen is now this. The Queen is a reality TV show, and that's an important thing for the country. And they need you to act a certain role that I think she was reluctant to play until the end, and then realize, oh, that's why they love Diana, because she's giving them this thing that I should be giving them, or can be giving them, and they want me to give it to them. Yeah, as my what's it? Not citizens, my public, or my people, or whatever the crown refers to it as. So that's sort of how I interpreted her journey, which again is something sort of a humbling experience for her in a way. It's not what I thought I was, but I still play a role. I'm not useless, but I just have to act in this new way now because this is my subjects. That was what I was looking for earlier. My subjects want,
Yeah, totally. And you empathize in that because it's not, none of this is easy.
For sure. Yeah. Like you thought you were something you're not, but you still serve a purpose. So it's just like wrestling with that a little bit, I think, is what this movie does really well.
Yeah, I totally agree. All right. So what's your number one, Alex?
So my number one movie that shaped my view of historical figures is The Insider from 1999. This is a film directed by Michael Mann, starring Al Pacino, Russell Crowe, and Christopher Plummer. And the IMDb plot summary: a research chemist comes under personal and professional attack when he decides to appear in a 60 minutes expose on big tobacco. And add a little more context just to the plot for those who might not have seen or heard of this film. Russell Crowe plays an ex-tobacco executive who it basically becomes a whistleblower, goes to 60 Minutes and wants to tell his story how the tobacco industry has lied, that they knowingly are putting cancerous causing chemicals into cigarettes. And Al Pacino plays a 60 Minutes producer who is tasked with putting his story on air. And Christopher Plummer plays Mike Wallace, who's a famous anchor. And 60 Minutes is a really popular news magazine show here in the United States. And probably, was it known globally? Did you know what 60 Minutes was in India or not?
No, I don't think so. But yeah, but obviously as I grew older, kind of understood and knew the importance of this show. Yeah.
So then just to add color to our international listeners, if you guys aren't as familiar with 60 Minutes, it is sort of the gold standard, definitely back in the 90s and 80s and even before that, the gold standards of television journalism. Like they were the highest quality and always factual and very important news program that we have in the United States. It still exists, but maybe the power is not as extreme. The reason why I put this movie on the list for me is it's just a great example of a film that, or the power of movies taking normal people and turning them into historical figures, at least in my mind. I never would have heard of this story, actually, of the fight they get back and forth on do they air the segment? You know, the CBS network who produces 60 Minutes. There was a lot of like push and pull over whether they feel like they want to air it, even though it was real. And you really see this personal drama of not only the whistleblower himself, who Jeffrey Wigand, who Russell Crowe plays, but also the standards and the morals that the news producer has to hold himself to. And these are all, in a way, kind of small and very personalized issues and troubles and tribulations they have to go to. This isn't like some whistleblower who's going to bring down the US government or some, major news event. I mean, honestly, I don't think anyone even would know about this story now at all, or even these people, if it wasn't for this movie, even to this day. It's not like it really changed anything. But what it does for me is really show the importance of normal people and the struggles that they go through and the battles that they fight, even if on a very personal scale, how important those are, even though they're not the Queen or the Elephant Man or all the other folks that we've talked about on this podcast so far. And what had you seen the film before, and what was your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I never seen it, although I remembered when this movie came out, a close friend of mine, I was an undergrad at that time,
Mm-hmm.
I ran into him the night that he watched this movie, and the way he reacted about this movie has stayed with me since that time, because he was so blown away. And the way he said, "Oh, this is like a must-watch movie, and it's gonna, change hearts and minds," or something, whatever he said. But of course, it took me,
20
all
years.
this time, 20 years to actually watch it.
Yeah, that.
But no, I was happy to watch it, and I agree. Like, I would say that there is a lot on the line, the personal stuff, but also, we're talking tobacco, which is so much money on the line, the reputation of journalism and this big show, this big network. Like, there is a lot on the line, at least for that time. Maybe over time in the grand scheme not so much, but there's a lot on the line. But yeah, it was a fun watch, I would say. But the movie to me feels very much like a 90s capsule movie at this point. The way it's constructed, the way it's created, how overblown it is, like how long this movie is, and it's ham central in terms of acting for the most part.
You think, huh?
I think so.
Oh, interesting.
But I mean, there could be more, obviously. But yeah, I think it's an interesting thing to have someone like Michael Mann take a movie like this, because the opening scenes when they're in, I want to say, somewhere in the Middle East, wherever
I think it's
they might
Iran.
be.
I think
That's what I thought. Yeah. Like, that to me felt like a Michael Mann movie in the beginning, and then the movie after that is a very talky movie with like huge loud scenes. Everybody's blowing up at all times. I mean, obviously you give Al the floor, he is going to blow up in every scene.
Yeah.
Which there's something fun about that, obviously. But yeah, to me the movie feels very bloated, even though it's a very fun watch. It is almost like the first few minutes of the movie in Iran sort of is what I was hoping the whole movie would be, actually. But then it's not that, and you're getting that same level of tension and excitement by just verbal acting, which after a while, because also it's so long, that I don't know, I started to look at my watch a little bit, like, okay, can we sort of get moving here? At the same time, it's obviously brilliantly crafted. Every department except for one that I will come back to is amazing in the movie. So I had a lot of fun watching it.
Interesting.
It just didn't emotionally capture me, because I'm a sucker for these kind of journalistic movies, right? All the President's Men, Spotlight. You're sort of totally riveted, and they're small stories, but they're intimate. This movie is a small story, but it's done with the theatrics of a Michael Mann movie, which to me is sort of where the issue lies.
Interesting.
I think. It's sort of jarring. That juxtaposition is kind of jarring.
See, that's why I was going to get into this too. I think this movie for me is effective because of that. It's taking people that are, again, this is not a big story. And I actually kind of like how this movie ends immediately with moving on to the Unabomber story. So everything that just happened in this movie instantly gets forgotten, like literally the next day, because the Unabomber, which is a major news story in the United States, a terrorist, they finally found him after like 30 years. So everything kind of instantly gets wiped away, but in these people's lives, they're changed forever. And I like how Michael Mann uses the same grandiose filmmaking techniques and style that he did. He did a biopic on Ali, who's one of the most famous sports stars of all time. And he covered Ali in many of the same ways that he did these two everyday guys. So for me, that actually elevates this movie and makes it work more. Also, like, I'm a huge Michael Mann fan, and this is actually my favorite movie of his and one of my 10 favorite movies of all time. Yeah, this movie, I had the same reaction actually when I saw this as your friend did on that college campus. I rented this on VHS, didn't really know what this was, and like it opened my eyes to the universe after I saw this on VHS, and it inspired me to love movies more. It's like, I don't want to say change my life, that I think that would be way too grandiose, but it definitely is one of the more important movies for me in my life and one of my favorite movies. But I can see, it's not taking an intimate approach, and I can see how that can be seen as bloated and overblown, because it is. And that to me is what works in it, because it's taking a very intimate story and telling it on a grand scale like you normally would with a actual famous person like Ali, for just, again, using another Michael Mann movie as an example, or even Public Enemies, a movie, another biopic that he made. And actually he's in the middle of doing another biopic right now that is going to be coming out.
Very excited for that one.
Me too.
Sure, yeah.
But he's taking everyday guys and putting it through that lens.
Yeah, it could also just be a moment of, when you watch it, and we talk a lot about movies, like watching this movie the way my friend watched it, which I'm assuming, we are the same age. So
we watched it together, I think, actually.
Probably,
me and your friend, yeah.
Watching it at that age just would have a very different impact. But, watching this now after having consumed so many of these kind of movies, I think I've gotten more attuned to that sort of subtler style of storytelling of this kind of a movie. Not to say that it can't be done this way, which is grandiose and kind of, heightened, but yeah, I don't know. There's something bloated about this movie, which, again, I was never not entertained. I think to me, it just compromised the emotional connection. Because there were moments, and Russell Crowe is amazing. You see his struggle. He's lost sort of everything in kind of going through this whole journey. So I'm not saying it didn't touch me, but I don't know. I expect these kind of movies to kind of wreck me on like a personal level. And there's something about the theatrics and such that kept me at an arm's distance.
Interesting.
And made it more enjoyable and fun.
Yeah.
Not as emotionally resonant.
Yeah, it's actually, as now you're bringing this up, just thinking back to the other, again, if you put this in the category of like a journalist movie, which is half of what the movie is, it definitely deals with that too. Yeah, they are typically very not theatrical. I'll put it that way. I actually, maybe this is just my personal taste, this affects me a lot more than those movies do because of the theatricality of it and what Mann's able to do with the camera. I mean, all of the extreme close-up shots of
camera is amazing.
His character showing he's under this pressure. He's framed a lot in these shots of he's in a window frame, he's in a car door frame. You really feel all the pressure that he's under. It definitely does not look real. It's Michael Mann's camera and all the colors and everything.
Not subtle.
Not subtle. That's exactly. Michael Mann is anything but subtle. But I can see how that All the President's Men or like a Spotlight, those are the two that come to mind right now, which are very much the story is sort of the drama and less the filmmaking technique. But
there's technique, they're just different kind.
Sure. It's not like showy.
It's not
right?
this.
Exactly. It's not showy filmmaking technique, which is what Mann tends to do. But again, I think that grandiose factor is what, to me, like makes these characters feel more mythic, because the filmmaking is mythic versus something more traditional. Then it's like, okay, well, these guys just did something and it didn't really make a difference to anything, actually, unfortunately. Yeah, and I just love the performances too. I think this is Russell Crowe's best performance in any movie he's been in, and Al Pacino, very understated for him, which I think is one of his probably like the most recent best performance that he's given.
I would say Irishman is his last best.
I think this is better than that, but I love him in Irishman. But that scene when he realizes that Mike Wallace is not on his side and defending, and just a look on his face of like, oh my God, like you have no journalistic integrity. And I thought we were the journalists, but Mike
Right.
Wallace turns out to be the businessman.
Yeah.
The businessman too, I think is just a great, great moment for him.
That's a good scene, and I also love, I would say, the chemistry between Russell Crowe and Al Pacino, because that's a pretty central relationship of the movie. If that
Right.
doesn't work, everything kind of falls apart, and it's so great to see them together.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. Yeah, that it's they dislike each other. Neither of them are likable people, especially Russell Crowe. I think we were speaking earlier about in Erin Brockovich, where you want to show the bad and the good sides of a person and not lionize them too much. And definitely, like, this Jeffrey Wigand guy does not
Yeah.
seem like a good guy.
No,
He's not a
no,
good
no.
husband. He makes a lot of mistakes. He has an anger problem, and the movie
Yeah.
doesn't try to gloss over any of that at all.
Yeah.
It's more just
Yeah.
about what he's doing and not about who he is. And I think a lot of that is, man too, and the screenwriter, but a lot of what Crow is doing in this too just is not. He's a disagreeable guy in a way you don't want to be around. Versus like Erin Brockovich, it's like, yeah, you're a little like hard laced, but yeah, I could hang out with Erin Brockovich.
Right. But this one,
I'm like, I don't want to know this guy.
no, probably not. No.
Yeah.
I would say that his accent was very interesting.
Mm.
And I was listening to a podcast, and they were saying that there's a lot of different affectations because Jeffrey Wigand himself was from different places and moved a lot and what have you. But I kept hearing like a British sort of Aussie kind of thing.
Oh, really?
So that sort of distracted me a little bit. But then
Okay.
I got over it at some point because, his performance from like a present standpoint is amazing and totally undeniable. The one department that I talked about earlier that I was going to put a pin on is the music.
Oh, wow. Okay. What are you going to say about this?
Hilarious to me.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it's at some point it becomes like really cool kind of loungy music, which I was like, oh, I'm in a different movie now, but still great music. I would listen to this track on its own for sure.
Yeah.
But where I laughed was when the singing comes in.
Oh, you didn't like the Lisa Berard stuff. Oh, really? Yeah. Oh,
I'm like,
okay.
Oh my
Interesting.
gosh.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite soundtracks of all time. I've listened to it. I'm not even kidding. No, you don't have to apologize. Like 10 times in the last 7 days, I've listened. This soundtrack's amazing.
Soundtrack by itself is great.
Yeah.
It's just in the movie, I was like, oh.
I think
I think
they're
it
trying
goes
to
to the
heighten
theatricality of it,
right?
all, right?
Exactly.
That's what's happening. It's sort of
yeah. But yeah, if you don't like the theatricality, the music is definitely very theatrical, and again, using Lisa Gerard, who they used for Gladiator,
right?
Similar kind of like elevating,
right?
Make it epic, and this is just two guys who are trying to do something that's really epic to them, but not really to anyone else, and I think that's what that choice makes the movie work. Yeah, I'm glad you finally saw it. You should email your college dorm mates or whatever. Just say it took 20 years, but I finally watched it.
Finally watched this movie. I mean, I will say that I kind of want to watch this movie again because I think we all bring our own sort of perspective and baggage, right? So I'm so attuned to these kind of movies that I was, maybe now that I know what this is, which is sort of this, theatrical heightened sort of thing. It's almost like if Michael Bay made like with better craft,
right. Yeah.
But it's in that genre that now that I know, maybe I'll feel differently about it. That said, I still had a very good time. Like
right.
It's seeing people, who are brilliant craftsmen, women, and doing great work. Like, man, it's not that fun. So
speaking of other movies, then what did not make your list?
Lawrence of Arabia, Born to be Blue, which is this great Chet Baker movie.
I never heard of that.
Which is why I didn't put it. Love and Mercy, which is probably my favorite music biopic movie.
Oh, never heard of that either.
Yeah, the one time I actually liked John Cusack, your guy. John Cusack, sorry. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. I feel like now I have to watch that because I love John Cusack.
How about you?
I had also Amadeus, so I'm glad we talked about that. Two other Oliver Stone movies, Nixon and Alexander, another Michael Mann movie, Ali, American Splendor, and then a music biopic, Stars and Stripes Forever, on John Philip Sousa.
Nice. Actually, Nixon, I would also put on my list. That's a pretty incredible movie, actually.
Yeah, it is.
All right. So what are we going to be talking about next, Alex?
So next, instead of going back in history to historical figures, we're going to think about the future and places we want to travel based on movies. So this is movies that shaped our travel wish list. Very excited about this.
Very excited about that. A very hard one to pin down because there's just so many places that I want to
So
go.
many places to go. Yeah. And so little time, but it'll be fun to at least go in through the movies to go to all those places. And hopefully one day we'll all go to them in real life. So we hope you enjoyed today's discussion and that it hopefully made you think of movies that affected your view of different historical figures. And we're available on all podcast platforms and YouTube, where you can find our reviews for each of the movies we covered. And please make sure to rate and review us. And don't forget to subscribe, as that really helps listeners find us.
Absolutely. But before you all leave, it's mom as in farm, not ma'am as in ham.
Good to remember.